Welcome to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to tell you that James Turk is with me. He's the founder and he's the lead director of goldmoney.com. James has a background as an international banker, but Chase Manhattan Bank, I guess 1969 when he started there. And then, of course, that's JP Morgan Chase today. 1983, he was the manager and the commodity department of the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And he's been the author of lots of articles, monograms, and he's written several books, the most recent of which is Money and Liberty in the Pursuit of Happiness and the Theory of Natural Money. I might want to ask James about that if we have time a little bit later. But right now, welcome so much, James. So good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Really great to be with you.
And I'd like to start out by just asking, what is your current assessment of the markets and global economy?
Yeah. Well, it's what I've been writing about for 40 years, and it's really getting sort of exciting because, we're in a transition. There's a reset going on. The old post-World War II order no longer was fit for purpose, and we're changing that into something new. And let's hope we go the right way. We
Yeah,
don't know how things are going to pan out, of course, and there are a lot of problems and concerns, both in a global macro sense as well as if individual markets. If you look at things like the Treasury market, um, and the what appeared to be runaway deficits of the U.S. federal government.
right.
If you look at the dollar and purchasing power, we had the CPI this morning. They announced the good CPI that because of energy prices, crude oil prices dropping, they made it sound better than it really
Yeah,
was. But if you look at what the core CPI was over the past year, it's 2.8%, well above the Treasury, the Federal Reserve's 2% target.
sure. Yeah.
So we can expect what we've seen over the past several decades, more inflation because there's no discipline on the monetary system anymore. And from a worrying point of view, I really sense, some difficulties out there in terms of the banking system, the economy overall. Consumers seem to be stretched. So it's sort of like mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, before the big one hit.
Hmm.
I think we've got another big one coming, if not this year, then next year for certain.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard for me to see how interest rates can decline when there's such a shortage of people willing to lend money to the US Treasury, at least at current interest rates. And we know now with so much debt on the books that it's impossible to service the debt. It's almost impossible at current rates. But if they were to go up to anything like we saw in let's say in 1980 with Paul Volcker, I mean, it couldn't happen. It was just obviously. So is it going to be monetized? I mean, let's hope it goes in the right direction. So if it goes in the right direction, what should we be looking for then?
Yeah,
How do you
it
see
looks
that?
like it's going to be monetized, but that's not the right direction. The Treasury under Yellen, Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen, that was a disaster.
Yeah,
Interest rates were near zero, and they financed all of this debt, that the deficits that Biden was accumulating with basically Treasury bills, the lowest possible interest
right.
rate,
Hmm.
rather than going out, 30-year debt with when the interest rates were so low.
Yeah,
And now that's making the job for managing this mountain of debt that Treasury is carrying ever more difficult. So I don't know, Jay, how we're going to go, but there are basically two options. There's the right way and the wrong way. The
yeah,
wrong way is what happened in Germany in the 1920s. The currency was debased. They ultimately led to, fascism, and we all know what happened in the 1930s and 40s.
right.
Venezuela went the wrong way. With, a more authoritarian government.
Yeah.
The the Constitution actually, when the Continental, the first currency of the country, collapsed in 1781, the Constitution was put together to form a more perfect union, including three important things that needed to be accomplished: a common defense, a common market, and a common currency.
Hmm.
And that common currency was gold and silver coin. That's the role of the federal government in terms of the monetary process. It's minting gold and silver. We've moved away from that, even though it worked reasonably well for 170 years. The last 100 years, or really since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, We've moved away from that, and we're suffering the consequences of it. So are we going to go the right way again and go back to the
Yeah,
provisions of the Constitution?
yeah,
Or are we going to go the wrong way, like all of these other countries have done, and bring in more authoritarianism, maybe more fascism? And it is worrying because, we both have grandchildren. I want them to have a good, comfortable life, just like I've had.
yeah.
And the political process is an important part of that.
So we have the foundation in the Constitution, if people want to take a look at that, or if they're forced to, perhaps. I have always sort of believed that as long as some people calling the shots, the elite, the people that are in charge, are continuing to get rich and the system holds together, and then they manage to keep it holding together as it did in 2008, they'll just keep on doing what they're doing until they're forced to change. But we have that we have that in our Constitution, as you say. It was defined by a certain amount of gold and silver. The dollar was defined. It was never to change, supposedly, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
that,
And everything that happened in the 1930s with Roosevelt, the confiscation of gold, and with Richard Nixon in 1971, when he broke the final formal link between, gold and paper currency, those were unconstitutional acts.
yeah,
The monetary authority rests with Congress. Uh, they authorized in 1792 the U.S. Mint with the Coinage Act.
right,
And they mint gold and silver coins, and that's supposed to be the basis of our monetary system, not promises of the federal government or promises of banks or promises whoever creates the currency these days. The irony is that it's so clearly written, but we lost sight of what the framers' intent was. And just to give you one example of many that we could talk about, it
yeah,
says that states are not supposed to allow bills of credit to circulate as currency. And people don't realize that the dollar bills in their pocket by their full name are dollar bills of credit. So the Federal Reserve notes, I mean, they're not even US government paper, they're Federal Reserve notes,
right.
which was constructed to get around the provisions of the Constitution, are basically unconstitutional, is what it really comes down to. What the country needs to do to go the right way is to get rid of all legal tender laws. Because once you get rid
Oh,
of all the legal tender laws, the Federal Reserve's position now becomes one in terms of competition relative to other alternatives, um, be it gold, be it Bitcoin, or anything else that has yet to be conceived by humanity as a way of improving our situation, way of raising our standards of living. And I think that's the key message of Bitcoin, though, Jay. There's I'm one of the few guys that recognizes that both gold and Bitcoin are on the same side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, of course, is fiat currency and unlimited printing by governments.
right.
We're fighting the same fight. And what Bitcoin brings to the table is they recognize the nature of currency changes over time. You get basically a step function periodically, from rudimentary weights of gold to coins with refining. 1694, currency became banknotes. Then another step function was, wire transfers and checking accounts and those types of things. Bitcoin is another type of step function in the development of currency. And what it's showing is that the currency that we now use, which are liabilities of banks circulating in commerce, be they by banknotes, paper currency or checks or wire transfers or plastic cards, that's 19th, 18th century currency.
Uh-huh.
We have to be thinking about 21st century currency, and that's digital. And it
Right.
can be digital based on math, which is what Bitcoin is all about, or it can be digital based on gold and silver, which is what my patents going back to the 1990s were, digital gold currency. So the key, I think, is to have a competition between currencies, let the market choose what they want to do. And the way to achieve that is to get rid of all legal tender laws. Because in terms of law, the highest form of law is two people's agreeing to something. That's a contract. You fulfill that contract. And what you offer as a tender and payment can be anything those two people agree to. The payer and the payee both agree.
Right.
When you have legal tender laws, you're forcing the payee to take something that he may not want to take. And we have to get rid of that. And we have to get rid of government intervention in the free market. We're going in the wrong direction, is basically what I'm saying. Preventing humanity to expand with creativity and raise our standards of living. And the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we'll we will all better off be.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, legal tender laws, I think, because it's illegal to use gold, for example, to make payments now, right? And
No, it's not actually.
we can
You
own
can use,
gold, but we can own it, turn it into currency and buy things or sell things, right?
yeah, well, you can own gold. In fact, this is what, the success of gold money has been. Because when we first started back in 2001, I thought this payment mechanism is going to be great because it's efficient, great for global commerce, very easy to move value across border when you move gold digitally. The concept was instead of moving gold by coin hand to hand, you move coin digitally. The gold stays in the vault. You click a weight of gold from your holding to
Right.
the payee's holding, and that value transfer then is an efficient way of conducting commerce. And we want more efficient ways to conduct commerce because then there are more opportunities to create capital and expand capitalism and raise people's standards of living. That's a good thing. So yeah, that's the way it started out. But gold money has become a savings vehicle now because what we recognized early on was what's called Gresham's Law. Thomas Gresham was an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I here in England. And what he said is that bad currency drives out good currency, or
Right.
bad money drives out good money.
Right.
So what people were doing is they were spending the fiat currency and saving gold. And it's
Right.
proven very worthwhile because when I
Sure
started gold
has.
money, gold was $300 an ounce. Now
Yeah.
we're 10 times that.
Yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, gold, I think since the turn of the century has risen more than the S&P 500, which almost nobody recognizes. But and yeah, absolutely, it's saved, it's pure wealth. It's people don't recognize. Yeah, you're not getting any interest. Well, actually, there are some ways you can get interest on gold now because of gold. Some people are actually leasing gold out and getting 3-4% on the lease gold. So it is possible to do that. And in fact, I've been involved in a program like that. Um, so
But when you
gold,
do that, you're lending gold, you're taking credit risk. That gold may
yes,
disappear. Money is not supposed to have any risk associated with it. That's why it's a tangible asset. And the beauty of gold is that it's not really good for anything else other than being money. And money is the most central thing in terms of society because we all have to act harmoniously amongst ourselves. And the way to do that is to communicate fair and in an honest way. And gold provides that honesty because you can't manipulate, you can't create gold out of thin air like dollars can be created out of thin air. And
mhm,
that's the big disadvantage of fiat currency and the big advantage of gold. And that's why the gold price now is 3,200 an ounce instead of 300 an ounce. It's not that new wealth has been created, Jay. When the
mhm.
gold price rises, it's important to understand that purchasing power that already exists simply moves from the holders of dollars to the holders of gold.
Exactly. That's
And when the gold price declines, it moves back to the holders of dollars or the currency that you're measuring the gold price in, is in effect.
yeah.
Because gold doesn't create wealth. It's a
It is wealth.
it is wealth. It's a
Right.
form of preserving purchasing power, which is
Right.
a form of wealth.
Right.
It's the money aspect of wealth.
Yeah, so you had your patents awarded to you, I think in 89, what year?
1997 was the first one.
97,
There were
1997.
four. Yeah.
So where do they stand now? And are they, I mean, okay, so money is broken, as you said, and you were sort of seeing that happening, I think, at the time, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read, I haven't yet. I just ordered a copy of Lynn Alden's Broken Money. Have you read that book? Are you aware of Lynn Alden's work at all?
I'm aware of who she is. I've not met her.
Okay.
I did not know that there was a book out. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, it's called Broken Money, and I think she's recognizing a lot of the things you're talking about. Um, but so where do we go from here? How do we, okay, so let's just hope and pray that we go the right way, as you say. Go back to the Constitution. What is money? And
But if we don't, Jay, we also have to think of ourselves not in a macro sense, but the individual sense. What do we do for
exactly,
ourselves and our family? And that's
exactly.
where physical gold and physical silver come in.
Yeah,
They've withstood the test of time throughout history. They've been money for thousands of years.
right.
They've gone through world wars, they've gone through great depressions, they've gone through the 2008 financial crisis,
Yeah,
and they'll go through the next financial crisis whenever it comes, um, which is financial crises are a recurring event when you're dealing with fiat currency in the banking system, which is one of the problems with this structure that's in place since 1694, and when
yeah,
the Bank of England started operating and became institutionalized. And particularly now in the post-World War II order, we're recognizing that the technology is changing things. And hopefully we will go the right way. But
Go the
as
right
an
way.
individual, we have to do what we can to plan for an uncertain future. And one of the best ways to save that purchasing power for that uncertain future is to hold physical gold and physical silver.
Right. You could do that at home and you're safe. You could do it at Gold Money and various other institutions as well.
Yeah, however you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
What it comes down to at the end of the day, Jay, is that we all want to sleep well at night. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that your financial future is protected as best as you possibly can within your resources. And gold and silver are a key element of achieving that goal.
Okay. Well, things
Physical gold, physical silver.
for sure. Things have changed since obviously changed. They're changing very rapidly since your patents were awarded you. Um, where do they stand today, your patents, and how do you see? I mean, first of all, I guess back up a minute. You understand that we need gold as money, or silver can work as well. But what you're talking about is an actual gold payment system, like an electronic or digital payment system, right?
Mhm.
Do I have that right? And did you
Yep.
envision that in your patents? And do you see that unfolding somehow in the future, that maybe in the near future, hopefully?
Well, governments are very protective of the existing system because it serves their interests. So
Sure.
they have things in place like legal tender laws. They manipulate the gold price to keep it from acting as the canary in the
Right.
coal mine when prices start rising because of inflation or monetary debasement. So it's been a struggle, and rather than struggle, what we've done in gold money is, as I was saying, made a strategic shift shortly after we launched back in 2001, 2002, shift from a payment mechanism to a savings mechanism.
Hmm.
And I still see that savings mechanism as critically important to people, and it's done well for gold money and the people who've used that service that we provide. Um, how it goes from here, I really, it's impossible to predict the future.
Yeah.
But we shall see how it does unfold, because what I am pretty certain about is that the existing structure is no longer technologically efficient.
Hmm.
There are better, less expensive, less risky things out there than using bank liabilities to circulate as currency. And whether we see that next step evolve in the next, year, next 10 years, I don't know when it's going to happen.
Hmm.
But if you look at the history of currency, again, currency being different from money, money is this mental tool that we use for economic calculation, and basically anything can circulate as currency, although gold and silver have proven themselves to be the best physical form of money.
Hmm.
If you look at the history of currency over the centuries, it continues to evolve and become more efficient. And that's what we're in the process of seeing again, with a major step function being away from bank liabilities, deposits in banks circulating as currency, to something circulating digitally. They're trying to make central bank digital currency as the next step. But
Yeah.
that's the next step in the wrong direction. It just means more control to the authoritarians who are trying to run things and preserve a system that's beneficial to them, but not beneficial to the citizens of the country in which they're ruling.
Central bank digital currencies, and we have Chinese friends here, good friends that go back and forth to China from time to time. And they have a social credit system. And if you think the wrong way, if you like the wrong, if you, God forbid that you'd speak about politics in China, you don't get on the bus, you don't get on the airplane, your bank account is frozen or whatever. And we saw that actually happen in Canada to a certain extent with the truckers. I mean, this sort of tyranny is really, really close to us now. I mean, more than I can remember, James, in my lifetime. We're seeing it, and not only seeing it, but people seem not to be concerned about it. And certainly, the Biden administration couldn't get there fast enough. President Biden came all out in favor of CBDCs, and I mean, it's just unthinkable as an American to think that we're not allowed free speech, the ability to say what we want, to think what we want. It is very, very disturbing, I must say. So,
It,
but
it is tragic, Jay. And
yeah,
the sad thing, the sad thing is during my lifetime, I've seen a deterioration
Yeah.
being quite significant. You know, we're approximately the same age, so I'm sure you've
Yes,
seen the same thing I've seen. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote Money and Liberty, because there's an inextricable link between money and liberty. And by money, I mean gold. You know, if you can create a purchasing power out of thin air, which is what governments do, you
hmm
give them power because money at the end of the day is
Right.
power. So that power has to be taken away from them, and that's the beauty of the Constitution. You know, the Constitution is full of checks and balances,
Right.
and one of the checks and balances is that the discipline that gold and silver impose on the monetary creation process is clearly written in the Constitution, and we've ignored that. We've ignored the wisdom of the framers, who understood money very well because they witnessed the collapse of the Continental during the War of Independence. So, you know, are we going to go again the right way or the wrong way? I'm really hopeful that all of the things that the present administration is doing
Right.
is ultimately going to recognize that, hey, we've got to go the right way because we're on an unsustainable path heading toward the cliff. And if the dollar goes over that cliff, it's going to have unimaginable consequences because you can see what happened in a country like Venezuela when they
Right.
hyperinflate. But we're
Yep.
talking about the dollar being the world reserve currency, or the currency that's used most frequently in global commerce and global trade. So the consequences, you just can't imagine what would happen if the dollar just collapses.
Right. Well, there are people that are sort of believing that we could see that we could go in the right direction or a direction closer to what you're talking about. I don't know if you know Michael Maloney, I guess Michael.
Maloney, yeah, I know, Michael.
Yeah, he's talked recently about seeing some good signs coming from the Trump administration. He believes that Bassett, Secretary of Treasury, understands gold pretty well. Of course, there's Judy Shelton, who was nominated for the Federal Reserve by Trump in his first term. She was rejected, I think, thanks to a Republican Senator Romney. Was the one that basically shot her down. Um, there are legal tender laws in Florida recently that I've become aware of that seems to be promising. So he points, and Trump himself, who doesn't seem to understand gold so well, perhaps, but he seems to think it's a great idea. Go back to a gold standard. So let's hope and pray that we go in the right direction, because otherwise, tyranny is, as you point out, an unlimited ability to reward your political friends and destroy your political enemies. And of course, we've seen First Amendment laws being violated here during COVID and else other times as well. So we have to hope. Second Amendment, I think, is something obviously that America is very unique about. But if if people can defend themselves, I think philosophically the difference is that our founders in the United States saw government as possibly being evil. Now, I talk to my friends and they don't see that. I mean, well, some of them, more conservative people, do, but most of them think, oh, government's here to help us. They're going to really make things well. We need to put our faith in government. And I think it was the theologian in Chesterton, I think in London, in England, that said long ago that if you don't believe in a higher being, then government becomes that higher being, and that will be their God. Government is their God. And we've seen it with the military industrial complex here, in my view. I mean, we've seen the propaganda that is propagated on us in all areas of our lives. And so money, as you say, money is one of them. Let's keep the gold price suppressed so nobody gets the idea that that's better than the dollar. And of course it is. But James, obviously the rest of the world is getting kind of tired of the domination and the money that's printed, and we're seeing the bricks in there. So it's becoming more difficult now because nobody. I mean, it's been increasingly difficult for the U.S. to fund itself, fund its expenditures, right? So I don't see, if we don't go the right way, how we can avoid some kind of hyperinflation. It's just hard to see, because how is the Treasury going to be funded if we don't? Well, I guess they can confiscate our wealth or force us to put some of our 401ks into treasuries. I say the governments can do anything they want if the people are passive and let them do it. But what are your thoughts?
Well, there are probably numerous stopgap measures that they can take to keep the present system up and running. But the more stopgap measures they take, the more fragile the system becomes. and ultimately it self-destructs. We were discussing this in an email exchange
Yeah.
not too long ago. What are the possible alternatives and how I put percentage probabilities on them. There are basically three. The first one is that the dollar collapses and we have
Hmm.
chaos.
Hmm.
That's probably a 20% probability. The second one is that they keep the system propped up for a long, long time into the future uh, by eroding liberty, more regimentation,
Hmm.
more authoritarianism, more controls, maybe capital controls and things of that nature. That's probably a 30% probability. And
Which
then
30%?
I think a 50% probability is
50.
they go the right way
Hmm.
because ultimately, the um, uh, survival mechanism comes into place. And
Yeah.
the people who are in the know, the people who are controlling things at the moment, they recognize that, the present system is unsustainable. And I think that's what President Trump, and I do agree that Secretary Bessant, Scott Bessant, he seems to know, obviously he does know, how the problems that he faces are making him understand, the issues that are out there that he has to deal with. And I think with some good leadership from the administration going back to the Constitution, we can solve our problems and reestablish what America really was in the past and truly make America great again. But to do that, we have to make money great again. And to do that, we have to go back to the Constitution monetary provisions of gold and silver.
Right. It seems that some of the people around Trump, not just the ones we named, some of the others may also have a sense of Vivek, for example, who's running for, I don't know if you know, he's running for a governor of Ohio, a state that you and I both grew up in. Seems to have, whether he makes that connection with money, I hope so, because as you say, there's probably nothing more important structurally than the monetary system to get us back on the right path. I want to ask you about Tether and stable coins. And stable coins, I think Tether has something they call Tether dollars and Tether gold as well. So it's a blockchain means of, I guess, do you know anything about Tether? It seems like the administration is talking about some people like David Sachs, who has something to do with cryptocurrency in the administration, is talking about stable coins and it's my understanding about the fourth largest purchaser of treasuries is stable coins, and that's because people from various countries that have third world countries that don't have stable currencies at all, less stable than the dollar, see U.S. treasuries as a better store of value than other currencies. So they're buying stable coins, which then invest in U.S. treasuries. And it's a big number now. And it seems to be the administration is thinking along those lines. So I was wondering if there might be some way to do stable gold or something like that.
Yeah, well, the
But some
best
sort
stable
of,
coin in my view is a gold coin. And by stable, it preserves purchasing power over long periods of time, and communicates that purchasing power without risk,
yeah.
once you have that physical coin. But more generally, in terms of some of these alternatives that are out there, they're like Bitcoin in the sense that the technology is being applied in different ways. It's human creativity expressing itself, recognizing that the existing system doesn't work, and there's got to be a better system out there using the technology that's coming to the table very, very rapidly in
Uh-huh.
terms of computing power, communications technology. I mean, look at, not too many years ago, Jay, being able to speak like this.
No,
Uh,
impossible.
with the
And
instantaneous communication with the internet. I mean,
yeah,
it opens up a whole world of possibilities
yeah,
as to how humanity can advance by conducting commerce, which is the key, to capitalism, the key to raising our standards of living. Um, so if we get government out of the way, just create a level playing field and let people um, move forward, under natural law, ethically, and we'll all be better off, particularly if we've learned to live with our neighbors, which is a key element of
for
humanity.
sure.
You may
Yeah,
not like your neighbor, and I'm talking here about countries as well as individuals.
yeah,
You may not like your neighbor, but you got to learn to live with them.
yeah,
They have a right to life just like you have a right to life.
yeah. You've got to learn to get together, to get along, that's for sure.
We
So
all want a harmonious society, and there are key elements to that. Using gold as money, learning to live with your neighbor, abiding by natural law,
Hmm.
and let individuals get on with their lives. Don't use force or aggression to force individuals to do things they don't want to do. As long as they live within a peaceful way, let them get on with life.
Yeah.
I wrote about this in the book that, yeah, if you look at those old Western movies,
Yeah.
the sheriff of the town had a gun that was called a peacemaker, and that was the role of the sheriff. He kept the peace. But today, when the progressives took control of the 20th century, changing things in terms of the Constitution, new amendments, and creation of the Federal Reserve, and all these things to keep the system going, that gives the government the power that they now have that they never had up until, say, 1913. When the Federal Reserve was created and two amendments were changed fundamentally the Constitution. The police now are involved in law enforcement. That's fundamentally different than keeping the peace.
Hmm.
And that's part of the reason why we have friction today in society. There's a professor here at the London School of Economics who said that capitalism is letting people do what they want to do. And then you have capitalism, as long as they live and work ethically in terms of natural law. We're so far away from that these
Right.
days.
Right.
And that's creating friction. And ultimately, that combined with the monetary problems, it makes me very concerned about how things are going to evolve.
Yeah.
And I hope things can evolve peacefully and we go back onto the right road
Right.
peacefully. But you always have to be prepared just in case
Oh, yeah.
um, mistakes are made and we go the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, it sort of reminds me of Ron Paul used to say that if government gets out of the way, people generally get along. They find ways to get along. And if they have some, I mean, it's a little bit like countries. What Trump would like to do with other countries is let's stop bombing them. Let's stop, covert actions to change their governments. Let's just trade with them. Let's get along with them, which was a position Ron Paul always had as well. But Ron pointed out, he says, governments pass one set of laws that hurt one group and help another. So they just by the very actions, they cause people to go after each other. And I think we're
Yeah.
really, and then you add propaganda into the mix as well, lies and half truths and so forth, and people really get riled up and hate each other, and there's no reason for it. I don't think there's a reason for it, but
Yeah.
so
In his book, Henry David Thoreau is not known for his book Civil Disobedience, but
uh-huh.
it's probably one of his most important contributions. He says the government that governs least is the government that governs best. And he's basically saying that you let the government just make sure that the rule of law is maintained and that
Right,
there's a level playing field, but don't intervene. Um, Only intervene if the rule of law is broken.
right.
And the government cannot break the rule of law either, nor can politicians
Yeah.
in a fair society. But we don't have that at the moment,
No,
and it's therefore concerning, how we go forward from here.
we don't have it at the moment, but you and I are old enough to remember a time when somewhat closer to it than we are now. James, so let me just, I want to, your patents, are they effective today? Can they be used today? Do you see them being in one way or another coming into play?
Well, they're now all in the public domain because they've all expired.
Okay, they
Patents only
expired. Yeah,
work for 20 years, and we never bothered to renew them because we had already established a business and the information was there for everybody to see.
sure.
Uh, so their history, but the concept of what they were all about still very much remains, and it's something that I continue to be focused on and wait for opportunities that we can do things to make gold circulate as currency,
Mhm.
because ultimately that's where we need to be headed, in my view. It's been money for 5,000 years. It served its purpose very, very well, and it will continue to do so in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. So basically, legal tender laws are one of the big things that are getting in the way. Do you see, we have the technology now, blockchain technology, that we could actually have a global monetary system based on gold and a gold payment system. We have that technology is in place now. It could be done if there was a political will to do it.
Yeah, basically that's it. There are too many roadblocks to make it happen.
Yeah.
Also, there's not a lot of profitability in the payment systems.
Uh,
Uh, when you do things digitally,
yeah.
when you do things through the
There
clearing
go
and
the
settlement
banks,
system,
right? The
uh,
banking. Uh,
yeah, the clearing and settlement system is very attractive to the banks.
yeah.
They make, it's estimated 35% of their profit from wire fees, checking account fees, and all of these types of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And there's essentially no risk to those types of things. But when you're doing things digitally, there's very little profit associated with it. At some stage, and that's why they're so good, because it makes commerce very efficient, because you can't really gouge payers and payees like the banks do
Yeah.
with their various fees that they're charging at different levels. And they're charging these fees because it's a cumbersome system that's using that's based on you know incorrect mercantilist philosophy going back to the 17th century that
Right.
is outdated. But until something happens, and whether that's going to be a major bank collapse or a dollar collapse or some other currency collapse, um, society as a whole probably won't be moving in that direction. But the
Yeah.
information is out there, the technology is there, and I'm convinced it will happen at some point in time in the future.
It could happen sometime in the future. Meantime, don't count on it, I guess. Put
Yeah, but then
save.
on the other hand, Jay,
Yeah.
it could happen this year. I mean,
Yeah.
what happens if the dollar collapses?
Yeah.
What happens if, the Treasury needs 300 billion and nobody comes to the auction to buy that
Yeah.
debt? They go to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates more inflation, and you're on the road to hyperinflation, which I
Yeah.
think we're really on, given how much phony money has been created over the last 10 years for a variety of different reasons. So things are out of control. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't have any discipline on the government anymore. We're not
No.
using gold and silver. The debt limit doesn't mean anything anymore.
No.
Whatever the government wants to spend, they just create money out of thin air. And
That's
that's
it.
how you go to
Yeah.
hyperinflation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when the people catch on, when the masses catch on, I think it's going to be over. At some point, and we may be getting fairly close, and it's probably not going to happen in a straight line. It's probably going to be something that shoots up exponentially when people get concerned and
Well,
scared.
$3,000 gold, it should be a wake-up call for everybody.
But they're not waking up so far.
Well, not
Prices
yet.
are not. They're still looking at NASDAQ and the stocks that are, I don't know. It's the technology, which I guess is appealing on the one hand, and there's a material science company that I love. I think it's going to be great. So in some ways, it's sexier. It's sort of more interesting technology than gold, which sits in a vault somewhere, I suppose. Although
Well, it
gold
should be
might,
that way, though, Jay, because those stocks are creating wealth.
yes,
Gold is wealth. There's a
yes,
fundamental difference between the two. There's a
yes,
fundamental difference between investments and money. In your
absolutely,
portfolio, you have money and you have stocks, and maybe
absolutely,
you have bonds. But I
right,
mean, basically, what I'm saying is the investment side, the wealth generating side, is different, or the is different from the money side, which is
right,
wealth preserving as opposed to wealth generating.
right, right. Well, if you have a foundation of gold and savings in one form or another, things you have to have, then you can venture out into some of these other things as well. But you want to make sure that you're debt free. You've got gold, you got some silver, got some savings. We have some short-term treasuries because that's liquidity and so forth. But James, any other thoughts? I mean, I'd like to read your book. I'm going to order it and maybe have you back on and talk about that sometime in the future. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, sure, of course. Hopefully you'll find it to be interesting. It's basically, as the title describes it, it
Well,
explains the link between money and liberty, why they are linked. And understanding that is the key to happiness. The pursuit of happiness is what we all want in life. We all want to be happy. And to be able to do that, you have to understand basics about money, basics about the monetary system. And that's what I've tried to achieve. And the other aspect of it is the theory of natural money. In the 20th century, we've forgotten what money is. Money is gold, money is silver. In testimony before Congress in 1912, J.P. Morgan said, money is gold. He didn't say gold is money. He said money is gold. And he understood, as did everybody back then, because he wasn't questioned by any congressman or any of the
right.
media that were in attendance then.
Yeah.
He's explaining why
Right.
money is gold.
Right.
It was understood intuitively. That's why I don't like to use the term sound money.
Yeah.
It's like saying wet water. The adjective is unnecessary.
Yeah.
We know what water is. And if you know what money is, you don't need to describe it as sound money. That's just enabling things like fiat currency to circulate and having people call it money when in fact it's not. It's just a money substitute.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And of course, liberty, I think it's not a word that means too much to Americans right now, to a lot of people, because they felt like they've been free. But I think liberty will sound very sweet at a time when we lose it. I mean, I'm just amazed at the lack of people that seem to be concerned about censorship during COVID and other times more recently. Very dangerous. And the whole idea of government picking winners and losers and all that stuff. But liberty and, as you say, happiness, well, if you're getting along with your neighbors and you're enjoying commerce and you're enjoying relationships with people, that's happiness. I think that's a big part. It's the opposite of what we're doing now at each other's throat in America. It's just,
Yeah, the bipolar nature of what the country has become
right.
is unbelievable. And that's the opposite of what the framers had established and existed up until, let's say, 1913, because that's, in my mind, is the key point. There were two amendments to the Constitution that were changed, basic checks and balances, and you had the creation of the Federal Reserve that year. And it's been downhill ever since, complicated by Roosevelt's gold confiscation in 1933. I mean, if you look at what happened in the 30s, gold was confiscated by Lenin, Mussolini, Hitler, and Roosevelt. Do you really want to be in that company? And what were they trying to achieve? They were taking gold out of the hands of people because they wanted government in control rather than people in control.
Exactly.
To take back control of your government, you have to be able to have gold as money and outside of government control.
Right.
It's very simple, and that's a key element of the book.
Right. And what made America unique, of course, is this bottoms up power system, right? Instead of the tops down. And I think we have to be reminded of that, going back to the people. The government's power flows from the bottom up, from the people. But if we cut the people off or lie to them and don't let them know what the truth is, and they lie through the monetary system too, which is very key.
Yeah, one thing that very few people understand these days is how revolutionary the War of Independence really was.
Yes.
In terms of it ended all of the feudalistic tendencies that had existed throughout history up until that moment in time. Law under the feudalistic systems, came from the Lord of the Manor. And he was interpreting the law or the monarch, and he was interpreting the law for his subjects. But in America, everybody understands what natural law is, or they're supposed to understand what natural law is and live by that natural law, and not have government control them, rather they control government. And they do that through various checks and balances in the Constitution, many of which have been thrown out the window. So we shouldn't be too surprised that liberty is being eroded and has been eroded for a century now.
Right. Well, I have a feeling that natural law isn't something that's taught our kids in school these days. But anyway, we can hope and spread the word as best we can, James, and you've helped us do that today. Thank you very much. And
you're quite welcome.
Maybe again, we talk about your more recent book. I want to get a copy and then I'll give you a call. If you're willing, I'd love to have you on.
I'd be more than happy.
All right. Well, folks, that's it for this week. And next week, I think Michael Oliver is going to be with me to talk about his momentum and structural model and how he sees the markets unfolding from this point forward. So until then, goodbye and God's blessings to you.